Back with you on Sports Talk Mississippi, streaming at SuperTalk.fm. Richard Cross, Michael Borky, thanks for being with us. C-Spire text line is open at 601-879-4395. We're coming to you from the Pearl River Resort Studios. Let's go to the Farm Bureau phone line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. Here is my conversation with Matt Moscona.
Sports Talk Mississippi, streaming at supertalk.fm, supertalktv.com as well. Great to be with you on this Wednesday afternoon as we get closer to another college football weekend. This is the weekend that LSU and Ole Miss meet in Oxford. Normally that would be in and of itself enough of a story, but there are a few other storylines that go along with this weekend as well. Happy to be joined by Matt Moscona on the Farm Bureau phone line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team at Mississippi Farm Bureau. Matty, what's up, my man?
Oh, Richard, another boring day, common garden variety day in Baton Rouge, right?
Yeah. I don't even know exactly where we should begin this conversation. So let's actually start with the game first. I do feel like the game takes on we'll get to the other interesting stuff in a second. We'll do game first. I think the game becomes a little more fascinating based on what LSU did last week. It felt like all the reasons in the world were there for LSU to mail it in. Frankly, kind of looked like they mailed it in against Kentucky the week before, but they came back, they played hard. Dan Mullen may have outsmarted himself in some areas. Great game for LSU running the football. Do you look at this one differently than maybe you would have a week ago?
Only if Matt Corral doesn't play. I mean, LSU is still a flawed football team, man. They are what they are. You know, they're 4-3. They have seemingly gained some traction there in the running game with the offensive line. I mean, that offensive line was objectively bad through the first 5 games. They couldn't run the ball for 20 yards against McNeese. And they've changed some things up. They've gotten some guys healthy. It's not really worth going too deep dive in. My guess is the things that LSU did successfully against Florida, they ran more counter plays. You know, DJ Durkin's going to spend this week game planning against that. And so does LSU have a counter punch? And my guess watching this team all year is no, they don't, because I don't think they're really well coached. So it's fun when you beat Florida around here. There's no doubt. And especially as a double-digit underdog, that's back-to-back years they've done that. And it was great to see a guy like Tate, leaders who have gone through this sort of tumult over the last year and a half, to have a game like that and have success was good for them. But realistically, it's still a flawed team. And Richard, most importantly, LSU against Florida allowed 500 yards and 42 points while having 4 takeaways. If Florida protected the football, they might have scored 70. So I think Ole Miss is going to move the ball up and down the field on LSU. And we'll see if LSU can score with them.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that's interesting to me about this team, and really kind of going back to when you and I visited at Media Days this year, we talked about what was possible for LSU. From a personnel standpoint, when everybody was healthy, it was a team that a lot of people thought could win 9, 10, 11 games based on the way the schedule shook out. But I also raised the point and the question with you, but what if they don't have the right chemistry in the locker room? And what if Derek Stingley doesn't return to the form of his freshman year and Max Johnson's just okay? And it didn't feel like there were a lot of people that were really wanting to go down that path. And yet here we are 6 games into the year.
Yeah. You know, the other thing you and I talked about is, you know, was the expectation on this team. And, you know, Ed Orgeron knew coming into the season, he needed 9 wins to feel safe. And 8-4 was going to be iffy, depending how it looked. And 7-5, he was fired. And once they lost to UCLA, it was abundantly clear they were heading down that path. And, you know, when we talked in Hoover, also, Richard, remember, Miles Brennan hadn't been injured yet. There was this very legitimate conversation. Is it Brennan or is it Max Johnson? Now that got answered very quickly because of Brennan's injury, unfortunately. You know, but this team, I think, they were whole against UCLA. I mean, they were healthy. They had Keyshawn Butte and Stingley and Ricks and all the guys that are out right now with injury, and it's a mash unit. But they had all those guys against UCLA, and they got gashed and cut up, and it was ugly out there. I saw it firsthand. So
good trip otherwise, right?
It was same as when LSU went to Wisconsin a few years ago. The trip to Lambeau when they played Wisconsin, it was awesome trip. I mean, a for the ages trip to tour Lambeau and see that venue. The tailgate party, the block party the night before the game was epic. I was so hungover Saturday morning. Like that was like college hangover. I mean, there's a bunch of LSU fans who didn't even make it into Lambeau for kickoff at 2:30 because the party Friday night was so great. But it was, and then the game kicked off. I mean, the same thing with this. I mean, LA was a great trip for LSU fans, and they went in huge numbers, but the game was miserable. But like that LSU was whole in that game, and it still went the way it did. So it would be a bit misleading to say, well, they're where they are because of the injuries. Not really, because we saw them whole and they weren't very good. They're talented in spots. They have massive deficiencies in spots, and they're poorly coached. It's a team that's going to end up around 500.
Yeah. And that's the reason that Ed Orgeron doesn't have a job anymore. I mean, I guess technically he's got a job for a few more games, and then he's going to get a great big golden parachute on the way out. Let's just kind of, I mean, there are a lot of different directions to go in this. Is the reason that LSU is paying the $17 million buyout and not trying to go down the road of for cause just because it's simpler and it's cleaner and it's easier and it makes the most sense, and you don't air a bunch of dirty laundry and you don't get an email from Jeremy Pruitt's lawyer 6 months after the fact saying we're about to tell everybody everything?
Pretty much nailed it.
Okay.
And it was not unanimous, by the way, among LSU administrators. Some that wanted to pay the buyout and some that wanted to fire Ed for cause. But I'll tell you something, man, and I know you covered him when he was there. You don't mess with Bebe's money. And he was prepared for a roll up the sleeves, bare knuckle brawl if they tried to get out of not paying it.
If nothing else, Ed Orgeron is willing to fight.
Yeah,
literally and figuratively.
And that what that means or would have meant is depositions and coaches and admins testifying under oath and a long drawn out court battle and disclosure. And you're talking about, when you're talking about for cause, you're talking about Title IX stuff. You're talking about NCAA violations. I mean, do you really want all of that in a public forum under oath? This buyout is your price for the next 6 weeks, and then go on your way and never mention any of this ever again. I mean, that's what the buyout is.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, it's expensive, obviously. Where is LSU financially? I mean, we know that Scott Woodward is going to swing for the fences, and he's going to pay whatever it takes, and they're going to pay the buyout. But I've had people that are pretty well connected that said LSU is not in as flush of a cash position as some people might believe. Is that reasonably accurate?
So the university as a whole, like, I mean, Louisiana, I'm sure faces a lot of the same issues publicly that Mississippi faces. It's not a rich state, and so Louisiana has gone through massive budgetary cuts to higher education in the last half decade. It was a big deal back in 2009 was the perception of paying a giant buyout amid budget cuts in higher ed, but people here love their football, man. So look, COVID, LSU ended up with about an $80 million budgetary shortfall in 2020 because of COVID, which is massive. But specifically with respect to this buyout, that's all privately raised money. That's Scott Woodward knowing the phone calls to make to the deep-pocketed boosters that are willing to pony up for it. So we can have the discussion all day long. Is that money well spent? But people can do with their money whatever they want to do with their money. And if Scott Woodward knows people to call to get that buyout money together, they got it. And whatever he needs to put together to get the next championship caliber coach in Baton Rouge, he'll get that as well, because he is as politically connected as anyone in this state, and he knows the numbers to call and the buttons to push. So Scott is a smart, savvy, tactful guy, and he has a way of getting things done. I have no doubt he'll do it here again.
Conversation with Matt Moscona coming up in just a few minutes, kind of starting and easing down the road this LSU football team as it pertains to the Ole Miss game this coming weekend, and then some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. When we come back, we'll kind of get into who the candidates are, how real some of the candidates are. You've heard Mel Tucker's name. You've heard James Franklin's name. You've heard Lane Kiffin's name. Who's real? Is there a smokescreen? What did we learn from the way Scott Woodward ran the baseball search that helps us understand how the football search is going to happen? All of that when we continue with Matt Moscona. Sports Talk Mississippi, streaming at SuperTalk Mississippi, streaming at supertalk.fm, supertalktv.com. Richard Cross and Michael Borky with you. Hey, Dad is off today, trying to get him back to feeling 100%. If you want to be part of the conversation, join us on the C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. Meet the authority team from C Spire Business. Gain the IT expertise you need to tackle your toughest challenges and find new opportunities. Learn more at cspirebusiness.com. We will continue now our conversation with Matt Moscona, radio host in Baton Rouge. The ESPN Baton Rouge station covers LSU and seems to be pretty plugged into the coaching search and the inner workings of LSU, looking for its replacement for Ed Orgeron.
And certainly is a guy that's politically savvy. I mean, I think his past is pretty well documented, government relations guy, and he's been an AD at other places, and he gets to come back home to this job. I feel like we got a little bit of a peek, and maybe you would say in two searches, but specifically in the baseball search, kind of the way he's going to go about things. There was smoke screens and leaks, and, I don't know if he was locked in on Jay Johnson the whole way. I don't know how real Pat Casey was. I mean, I know they went down the road with Mike Bianco. I think Mike Bianco and Ole Miss got played a little bit in that deal. But he seems like a guy that's like, he doesn't care what anybody else thinks. I mean, it's like all's fair in love and war and coaching searches, maybe. I am curious what you learned in watching him navigate the baseball search, which is a really big deal at LSU, but it ain't the LSU football job either. What did you learn about the way he goes through this process that you think is going to be similar in the football search?
Well, look at the contrast to what happened with women's basketball. And again, women's basketball, but who he hired is significant because he got Kim Mulkey from Baylor. Man hired a 3-time national championship winning coach away from Baylor. And he did so without anyone knowing it was happening. I mean, they announced on a Saturday that Nikki Fargas was leaving for a job in the WNBA, and on Sunday, they announced Kim Mulkey. I mean, he got that deal done without anybody finding out. That means Fargas was out. He got the money from boosters to pay Mulkey 2.3 or whatever she's making a year. All the concessions she wanted in her deal, got it done. Nobody knew. And I'm going to tell you, Richard, that was the plan with baseball as well. And this is a roundabout way of answering your question, but they were down that road with Kevin O'Sullivan.
Oh, and boy,
were they far down that road. I mean, to the point where they had an agreement in terms, in principle. And at the 11th hour.
And I'm interrupting you, Matt, but I have said on this radio show, on Sports Talk Mississippi, obviously a different audience that you deal with, Kevin O'Sullivan was done right up until the point that it wasn't done.
Yes, that's fair. I mean, it was, hey, send over the contract and let's have the press conference type deal. And but for reasons that we don't necessarily need to go in here, it fell apart at the end. And what's interesting is that's when you actually got to see Scott Woodward go to work, because now the job was open, because Maneri at this point had publicly announced his retirement when they were doing a lot of that due diligence and going down the road with O'Sullivan prior to the announcement of Maneri's retirement. So when it was public, like it is now with Ed Orgeron, we got to see Maneri work and vet candidates, or Woodward work and vet candidates and see where he landed. And look, he felt a ton of pressure from Skip Bertman, from former players to hire Mike Bianco. Yeah. And he ultimately said, this is my hire. I'm going to hire the guy who thinks best for the job. And he hired Jay Johnson. And I don't think anybody's complaining. I know there aren't a ton of people around the conference of the country paying attention to what's going on with LSU baseball during the offseason. But I mean, Jay Johnson has absolutely annihilated everything he's done, from recruiting to public relations to player relations and everything. And I'm gonna tell you, man, people around here feel like they hired LSU's version of Nick Saban in baseball with Jay Johnson. And that, I think, has instilled a tremendous amount of confidence in Scott to know that wherever he lands on this football hire, he's probably going to connect, because more often than not, he has.
You know, it's funny with Jay Johnson. I had just gotten back from the Super Regional in Tucson, and so I had kind of watched them up close and personal. And so as the conversation about Mike Bianco to LSU was going, we were playing the whole, you know, who do you hire? What route do you go? And I said, there may be a recency bias here, but what Jay Johnson has done at Arizona is pretty dang impressive. And if Keith Carter has to go down that road, obviously Dan McDonald was going to be involved, and East Carolina, Cliff Godwin was going to be involved. But I thought, you know, if you get past those guys, you might be a little crazy not to take a look there. And then you look up a week later or a few days later, and LSU has hired Jay Johnson. It certainly, by all accounts, seems to be off to a really good start without ever having thrown a pitch or swung a bat.
Right. And people here are excited. You know, people here, look, I mean, they're going through fall baseball right now. I mean, there's this, if you're interested, there's this little 2.5-minute video clip that LSU posted Twitter, and mash up Johnson coaching during fall ball. And if you're a baseball nerd, if you geek out on stuff like that, you'll watch that and go, oh, like that's just the next level attention to detail. If people are excited about it, man. But but that also speaks to, I think, why there's this great level of confidence in Scott Woodward to make this football hire. Because if it was Sarkisian at Washington and then Chris Peterson or Jimbo and Buzz Williams or Kim Mulkey or Jay Johnson, this is what this dude does. I mean, his professional career has been building to this moment to make this hire, the LSU football hire. And a lot of people here just have confidence he's going to nail it.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I mean, there's a track record there that makes sense. You said a second ago, though, that there was pressure to hire Mike Bianco in the baseball job, and he said, no, this is my hire. Is this football job his hire? How involved is William Tate, the new president at LSU? Because that could change the dynamic a little bit.
So for the listener, just a little backstory. LSU hired William Tate as its new president in May. So he's been here 4 or 5 months. He has no ties to Louisiana. So he is new here. And William Tate is the first Black president at LSU. And he hasn't said this publicly, but it has been conveyed behind closed doors in many circles, because I have this from so many different sources independent of each other. And it is basically just an understood narrative now that he has a strong desire for this to be a legacy type hire, to bring the first minority head football coach to LSU. And so there's this a little bit of tension here where you wonder, okay, is that can't possibly be the only criteria. But if that is a mandate, then it seriously limits the pool that Scott Woodward fishes in. So there's some apprehension there. But I'll tell you this, Richard, Scott Woodward, you know, we talked about his background being politics. He is as politically connected as anyone in this state. And if Scott came here, obviously, to be back in his hometown and close to his family, which are all still here in Baton Rouge, but he really professionally came here for this. He came here to make this hire. He came here to make the LSU football hire. And boy, I would just have a hard time believing that when this is all said and done and we look up, that Scott Woodward hasn't won this process. You know, ultimately, yes, he works for the president, but the president also works for the governor. And there's a lot of other connectivity there with boosters and board members and everybody who wants to have a say. It's the LSU football hire. But boy, Scott is truly adept at doing this, man. You know, a big primary reason why you saw Mel Tucker's name race to the forefront was because this is an understood narrative here. You know, Mel Tucker's a great coach. He's Nick Saban hired him 3 times. It's not that there's no merit there. He's head coach of Colorado for a year. He's in year 2 now at Michigan State. But a guy who's in his 3rd year as a head coach and has a sub 500 record for his career, that's not the type of hire Scott Woodward would typically make. Yeah. But if you're having to narrow your search based on certain criteria, it is going to turn up some different candidates than we would normally assume. And the other thing too is there just doesn't appear to be that one no doubt like upper deck home run shot hire that's out there right now.
So where does that leave them? If there's a no doubt upper deck shot home run hire, where does that leave LSU?
I think I disagree a little bit with the idea that there's no home run hire out there, honestly.
Matt's going to talk himself around on that in the next segment, because he talks specifically about some candidates that are out there, and there's a name that's pretty local that he thinks may be the best route for LSU and maybe the safest route for LSU. That's when we continue. Sports Talk Mississippi, streaming at supertalk.fm. Interview, but a lot to unpack as we continue our conversation with Matt Moscona on the Farm Bureau phone line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team at Mississippi Farm Bureau. We talk here about candidates for the LSU job.
So you, a couple of weeks ago, before Ed Orgeron was even officially out, although it was a formality, talked about some names that were out there. Lane Kiffin's was one. We'll get to that in a second. James Franklin's was another. And James Franklin would, I don't mean to sound insensitive when I say that, but based on the conversation that we are having, would check that box as a minority as a head coaching role. The credentials are outstanding. I mean, you do what he did at Vanderbilt. He's won at a high level at Penn State. Why is James Franklin, and I haven't heard you talk about this, why is it okay to go down that road, given some of what is in his background with the attempted rape cover-up at Vanderbilt, in the middle of this Title IX investigation, all that's going on with that? I don't feel like anybody's talking about, yeah, but this guy isn't exactly squeaky clean and the no doubt you feel great about it going forward hire.
Yeah, it's a very fair question. Not only was there that situation at Vanderbilt, but there's also been a situation since he's been head coach at Penn State that involved Micah Parsons in a pretty violent interaction between 2 players. But it is important to note, Richard, that in both instances, James Franklin was cleared of any wrongdoing involved in those. Now, how do you massage public narrative? I don't know. I mean, you asked me about it, so the perception is that he was involved in some respect, and many people have asked me about it. So I've actually had to go do some digging because of that. I had to refresh I don't cover Vanderbilt. I mean, I was aware of the situation. No, I mean,
anybody?
Right. Well, there are a few unfortunate souls. Yeah. So I've kind of had to refresh my memory on all of that, what happened at Vanderbilt. And apparently James Franklin's hands were clean in that. At least that's how the ruling came out. Now, is that a path LSU wants to walk? We'll see. I don't mind saying that James Franklin is the preferred hire of William Tate, the LSU president. He's the guy. He is the number one choice for William Tate. And by the way, Richard, if you asked me, my 1A, 1B would be James Franklin or Lane Kiffin. I mean, those would be the realistic candidates that LSU could land, that I would say, you get one of those guys here, you're going to win a lot of football games. So the issue of race, ethnicity, minority aside, I think James Franklin would crush it here. Won 9 games at Vanderbilt. He's done well at 2 head coaching stops now. Really bright offensive mind. You've met him. I mean, we talk to him every year at FCC Media Days when he was at Vanderbilt, and he's engaging. He's wonderful with the media. I think The fan base would love him. He's a guy that I think would absolutely crush it with the resources at LSU. He would win championships at LSU.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so maybe, I don't know if it's the elephant in the room. I think it's probably the part of this conversation that our listeners are most interested in. Lane Kiffin, his name is there. People say, well, he's on the list, but he's not at the top of the list. There are others that say, oh, he is actively trying to get this job. I'm not sure that that's really the way it works in the middle of the football season. Is Jimmy Sexton really good at his job? There's no question about that. Tell me about the Lane Kiffin piece.
Oh, that's very real. So when LSU lost to UCLA in the opener, the Monday after that game, I had a call from two boosters who had been contacted about contributing to the buyout. So at that point, you knew, all right, it's over. Like that they had a hunch over the summer, they were getting their ducks in a row. And once they lost to UCLA, it was like, okay, this is inevitable. And at that time, I also was given two names. One was Lane Kiffin and the other was Bill O'Brien. Now, since then, after the Auburn game, I was told Luke Fickell, Lane Kiffin, or Luke Fickell, James Franklin. And then in the last 7 days or so is when it really got pressed upon me that Mel Tucker was a candidate. Those I'm not saying that's the extent of the list. I'm saying those are the five names that I've heard from reputable people connected with the football program that I would consider good sources in the know. And Lane and Bill O'Brien were the first two names I heard. I think I will tell you that I've had people call me directly on Lane Kiffin's behalf. I don't doubt at all that that's agent-based. That's Jimmy Sexton doing what Jimmy does. Yeah. It's I think important to remember that Jimmy Sexton and Scott Woodward are very good friends. Fisher met over the years together. So, and if you're Jimmy Sexton, considering Levy is also a Sexton client, you know, his MO is let me move this guy into a job and then open up another job to get my other guy into that job. So if he moves Kiffin into LSU, and you would tell me if I'm wrong, but if this is how it's been expressed to me anyway, that Levy might be the guy who would replace Kiffin if Kiffin left. Well, now Sexton's got two clients in place in prominent jobs in the SEC. So for a lot of reasons, it makes sense. I know Ole Miss fans might recoil at that a little bit, but the reality is with LSU, and I don't think LSU is the best job in the country. I'm not saying that, but LSU.
No, but it's a top five job.
If it's not in the top five, it's right there knocking on the door. And I would argue it is a top five because for all the draw have been in this state, you are the only Power Five in a talent-rich state that per capita puts more guys in the NFL than any other state per capita. You have financial and facility resources that are equal to anybody. And it's a place, Richard, where, and this might be a big point that Scott Woodward has, this could be it. The last three LSU football coaches have all won national titles.
Yeah.
Since 2003, LSU has won 3 titles and played for 4 of them. The only school that's done that aside from LSU is Alabama. And no one is going to confuse the last 2 head coaches at LSU as X and O geniuses. Okay. And they won national titles here, which means my iPhone might be able to win a national title at LSU. You know, I'm being facetious, obviously, but the point being, any competent coach should feel like they could come in here with these resources, recruit at a high level, and win at the highest level. So if you're Lane, there's probably some belief to say, I don't think I can win a national title at Ole Miss. I can win a national title at LSU and do it quickly. That's the appeal, I think.
You know, it's interesting. I'm not close with Lane Kiffin. I know few people are. But I do think how he feels about Oxford and the Ole Miss job have changed since he's been here. I think probably what you're saying is real. I mean, for Ole Miss to win a national title, I mean, it's stars aligned and other people down and breaks and health and all of those things rolled into one. And maybe then it's still not enough. But I do think he looks at this now as a spot where you get to the playoff, especially if we end up with an expanded playoff and then all bets are off. But no, I mean, I think the stuff that you're saying about that job makes sense and it's not crazy. Two things, and I appreciate your time. What do you think the timeline is? I mean, do you have to get to the end of the season?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like you have to.
They're going to hire a sitting head coach. So this won't be a coordinator hire. I'm almost certain this won't be an NFL hire. But especially with the December signing period, I mean, LSU plays A&M the Saturday after Thanksgiving. I would assume Wednesday at the latest, they've got a coach in place. I mean, you just
Sunday.
You're right. I'm giving myself a buffer. That's why I'm saying Wednesday. Monday might make more sense to take advantage of the news cycle, but it'll be, given the way Scott works, my assumption is this is done. And then it's a formal face-to-face, that Sunday, formal face-to-face with who the guy is, sign your contract. You make that introduction on Monday, but I'll give him a little bit of a buffer and say Wednesday just in case.
With Matt Moscona, because when we come back, I ask him specifically, as it pertains to Lane Kiffin, where is he on the list? I mean, if you had to rank the order, what's the likelihood that this is Lane Kiffin? Where is he on the pecking order? Is he the first choice, the second choice, the third choice? And then, Borky, we got some stuff to unpack from what Matt had to say. I mean, there are some things that I'm like, I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with you, but I'm not questioning that people have said some of the things to Matt that he says that they have said. It's a fascinating dynamic in and around Baton Rouge with regard to the LSU job. We'll finish that conversation up next. College football fix to start the 5 o'clock hour, and a whole lot more with my conversation from earlier today with Matt Moscona on the Farm Bureau phone line.
Probably 5-6 weeks out from it happening. Where would you predict at this point? Give yourself some wiggle room that they end up.
Feet to the fire, huh?
And I mean, I guess in making that calculation, you have to factor in the role that William Tate plays and how locked in he is on this, as you called it, legacy hire, a minority.
So I would have said before the Alabama game that this would have been Lane Kiffin. Slam dunk, no doubt. I think his unwillingness to punt in that game gave like going for it on your own 30 in a 2-score game. Like, I think that maybe gave me certainly some pause. And I think the success James Franklin has had early in the season has probably caused him in the minds of many to take the lead. But I'll tell you this, Richard, I firmly believe, and if you look at Vegas odds, it reflects this. I believe if LSU does end up hiring one of the two prominently mentioned minority candidates, I think William Tate prefers James Franklin. I think Scott Woodward prefers Mel Tucker.
Okay.
The initial contact with James Franklin's representatives did not go so well, which is probably why you've seen him bump down a little bit in the Vegas odds. But Mel Tucker is the betting favorite right now to get this job. And man, it ain't often that Vegas is wrong. But when they initially released their odds, Mel Tucker was plus 1,200. I told my audience, I said, y'all get some of that action. I'm telling you, get at plus 1,200, get some of that action. That was Monday.
Just a Hyundai, if nothing else.
Tuesday, it went from plus 1,200 to plus 200. He's now the betting favorite to get the job. It ain't often Vegas is wrong, but they were a day late on that.
You put Lane Kiffin at this point at 3 on the list?
I think it depends who's making that hire, who has the final say. And I think how the rest of the season plays out matters. And I'm not trying to sidestep the question, because I legitimately think at any moment you could take those 3 names we mentioned, put them in a bag, shake it up, pull one out, you might be right. But I I do think that Lane Kiffin would be, it's going to be odd to say this, I think he would be the safest choice in this process. How about that? Lane Kiffin, the safest choice. But it makes a ton of sense. I think there's a lot of belief that 46-year-old Lane Kiffin is a more mature head coach that has proven he can win in the SEC. You give him the resources of an LSU. I think he's the best play caller in college football. I think there's a ton of reason why that makes sense. And I think that probably would have been the no doubt choice if Scott Woodward just had full autonomy with no outside influence. And he may still have that by the end of this, but it's something that we're going to next 6 weeks, every single day, incessantly.
You've been kind with your time. I appreciate the insight. I hope we can visit again between now and then, whenever then turns out to be. And should be a fun football game. Maybe it'll be a fun football game this weekend in Oxford as well. I think we talked about that like half an hour ago.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of points. But, hey, can we just make sure that Ole Miss goes powder blue, red, gray pants? I know we've done this before.
That is the right answer.
I mean, it is. LSU fans will like when I say this. That is the best uniform in college football. The script Ole Miss, powder blue helmet, red jersey, gray pants. Stop screwing it up, Ole Miss. The powder blue helmet with the powder blue jersey is not a good look. The all dark blue is not a good look. You have the one. You have the answer. It's like the Saints with their color rush, their white color rush uniforms. Make those permanent. It is fire, straight fire. You have, like, when you have something so good, use it. Come on, Johnny Reb. What are you doing here? Who makes that decision, Richard? Do you make that decision?
I do.
Does Lane,
I do.
Does Lane make that decision?
No, I do. I'll take your.
Does the guy in the shark suit make that decision? Who makes that?
Haven't seen much of the shark guy this year. I think they've kind of phased that out as well.
That's a shame. And that's actually probably right. See, that's a good decision. Getting rid of the shark guy, good decision. Not going baby blue, red, gray, bad decision.
Yeah. Do you see that they painted the end zones red and put Manning in the end zone? They're retiring Eli's jersey. It's Eli Manning Day on Saturday.
Is he going to fall down on the way to midfield?
Go away. You suck. At Moscona, ESPN Baton Rouge. You can watch him. You can listen to him. He's everywhere. Thanks, bud.
All right.